One of the easiest ways to level up home cooking is to add stock to the mix. You can add dimension and complexity and body to pretty much any dish that uses liquid as a base. So if that's making rice or especially soups, stews, braises, you can just increase the amount of complexity in a dish and give it a whole nother level of flavor. It's also one of the easiest things to make in the world. You're just extracting flavor from meat and vegetables. Now there are a number of classic French style stocks. The most classic is maybe veal stock, but there's also beef stock, pork stock, vegetable stocks. Today we're gonna make chicken stock, which is perhaps the easiest of them to acquire all the ingredients for. And we're gonna make it 3 different ways. We're gonna make a quick stock in a pressure cooker. We're gonna make a light stock, and we're gonna make a dark stock. And then we're gonna make some derivatives of those that are very useful, consomme and Demi Gloss. So in its simplest form, mirepoix is just a little bit of onion, a little bit of carrot, a little bit of celery. I like a 2-to-1 ratio where it's 2 parts onion, 2 parts carrot, and 1 part celery. This is actually like the least effort mirepoix that you'll ever see. We're just going to top and tail the onion and take off the skin and throw that right in. We want to keep as much of the root ball as possible because that's going to hold our onion together in the pot and make it easy to extract later. Carrots. These take a little longer to extract than anything else, and both these carrots and the onion are going to provide us with a lot of sweetening. So we do want to minimize the amount of surface area. At least I do. I don't like a lot of sweetness in the stock. I just want like a basic flavor of carrot. And then with the celery stock, we're just going to cut it in half just because it's too long for most pots. So we've got our 2 onions, celery, and carrots. This is our functional mirepoix for making stock. When we're making a meat stock, we need to balance both body and flavor. So we need to extract as much flavor as possible from whatever we're putting into it. In this case, that's gonna be meat, and we do get a lot of collagen from bone, which is where the body comes from. So we need to get a good balance of thin, extractable bone, and we need a lot of meat. So we're gonna use chicken legs and chicken wings. Chicken wings are pretty thin. They have a lot of collagen, especially in the wing tips. And then the chicken thighs have a ton of flavor, and they also have some larger bones where we can still extract a lot of collagen. So we're gonna keep this pretty simple, do some very minor basic butchering. This is a chicken leg. We're just gonna slice right between the bones. Want to just kind of lacerate the meat a little bit, turn our cleaver over, pop it, and that's basically gonna break the bone and give us some nice extraction surface. So when we're breaking down our wings, we want to separate it at the joints. The joints have the most collagen available. And then we want to break the bones right in the middle. That's it. That's all it takes to break down the chicken. For our first stock, we're gonna use this 6-quart pressure cooker. This is what I cook most of my stock in. It can take 6 quarts of liquid, it's 8 quarts total. But the way I do the math for how much chicken I need and how much mirepoix is basically take the total volume of the pan, so 6 quarts, and divide that by 3, and then turn that into pounds. That many pounds is how much meat you need. So in this case, that's 2 pounds. And then if it's under 6-ish quarts, I would only do like half a mirepoix. Otherwise you get a lot more vegetable flavor than you do meat flavor. And really, it's called chicken stock, not vegetable and chicken stock. So that's 1 onion, 1 carrot, and half a stalk of celery. So for our chicken content, we've got about 2 parts wings by weight to 1 part thigh. So that's 1.3 pounds of wings and 0.66 pounds of, that's both thigh and drumstick, whole leg. And this we're going to add to a hot pressure cooker. We're gonna heat this up over like a medium flame. Basically just like preheat the pan. Once we've got a little heat in there, we'll add some oil. So once we get kind of like a shimmery look going on in there, we're just gonna set our onions down, face down. Crank the heat up so that we get some good coloration on there. We just want some like gentle browning so we get some caramelized flavors in our final product. All right, we don't want to char these too much. And with our meat, we're again going for caramelization, but we also are trying to bind some non-soluble proteins and myoglobin that will turn into scum later on if they aren't dealt with. We don't want to overcrowd the pan because otherwise we'll get steamed chicken instead of seared chicken. I'm pulling these out when they're pretty blonde. We don't need a ton of color on these. We want a little bit of that caramelization flavor, but really the big deal is just finding that myoglobin and the soluble protein, the insoluble protein, sorry. Once the last batch is mostly bound, then we're gonna put all the rest of our stuff back in along with the drippings. We'll add our water in. You always, always, always use cold water when making stock. Always use cold water when cooking. This is a public service announcement. All right, so now we're gonna crank that heat all the way up to high and throw our lid on. All right, once our pressure cooker has been on for about an hour, we're gonna depressurize it naturally and then strain it off into a large container. So I've got a colander and a double layer of cheesecloth. So here we have 4 quarts of our finished quick stock. It's not the prettiest stock, it's not the most technically perfect stock, it's not the most traditional stock, but it is pretty damn good for only about an hour and a half of work. This is what I make most of the time. It's, I don't know, half the effort for 90% of the outcome. If you're gonna make a chicken stock and you've got just like, need to get a weeknight dinner out or something like that, this is the one to go with. For our light chicken stock, we're gonna use an 8-quart stock pot. We're gonna run the same math. 1/3 of 8 gets us 2.66 pounds of chicken. And now we're gonna take it to the stove. So we're gonna add all of our chicken to a cold pot. Cover that in cold water. See all that particulate that came out right away when we poured on the water? That is exactly what we want to get rid of. That's what we don't want in our final product, and so we're removing it by simmering it off now, rinsing it, and then we'll bring it back to our final stock pot. After about 15 minutes, we've got all this scum that's come up to the surface. That's exactly what we want to happen, because now all of that is not going to be in our final stock. So we're going to turn off the heat, let this cool down a bit, clean out the pan, and start over again. All right, after washing the pan and a quick rinse of all the meat, we've got some nice clean white chicken. So we're gonna add our other mirepoix ingredients. We literally wanna fill the pan. So anything that comes up while we're filling it, we'll just quickly skim off. It's pretty easy for stuff to get caught on the chicken while it's in the strainer, so it's safe to expect a little bit of it, but we'll strain that off. Throw as much water onto the front of the stove as possible. Over medium heat, we'll bring this up to a simmer. We want to do it as slowly as possible, because if we bring it up to a rapid boil, we're going to end up with a really cloudy stock. So this recipe for the light stock usually takes about 4 hours. In this case, I think it's most important to just taste it frequently. So maybe once every hour or so, I'll just dip a spoon in, taste it, see how it's developing. This one ended up being pretty great, right around the 4.5 hour mark. It's very sweet. It's got a lot of those like onion and carrot notes and a ton of chickeny flavor. It's not like roasty or anything. It's just like that mild chicken soupy kind of flavor. So now we'll just strain it off into another container. We'll just let it drip off for a little while. It's just important that we don't push on the solids because we don't want any of that like cloudy, scummy stuff that we tried to bind in earlier coming out. So despite having a larger pot, we did actually end up with quite a bit less than the quick stock, and that's because of evaporation. So here, as it was reducing and developing flavor, we were losing a lot of volume, but with the quick stock, we had no evaporation because it was under pressure. All right, so here we have our quick stock and our light stock. The light stock was definitely extracted much more passively, but in an open container, so we have a lot more evaporation going on. We ended up with about 2 liters of this. Where with the quick stock, we ended up with about 4 liters because it was covered. We lost very little to evaporation. However, because it was under pressure, it ended up boiling the entire time, and we churned in all that protein and everything that we skimmed off the other ones. So it's very cloudy by comparison. It is a rich golden color though, which is kind of pleasant. But let's see what we can do about that cloudiness. All right, so to clarify our chicken stock, first things first, we're gonna chop up 1 chicken breast. Basically, we just want to grind this up. You could do this in a blender or a food processor, but I think that in this case, just using a knife is pretty good as long as you've got something heavy to work with. Then we're gonna take 3 eggs and we're gonna separate the egg whites into our pot. Then we're gonna stir up our chicken and eggs until it's nice and homogeneous. We just want kind of a mealy mixture, something nice and slimy and consistent. We just don't want any like strings or anything like that. It won't be a huge deal, but ideally we'll have a pretty homogeneous mixture. And then on top of that, we're gonna add 2 liters of cold quick stock. And we'll bring that over the stove. All right, so we're gonna put our chicken stock mixture onto the stove over medium heat, just to bring it up to a simmer. And we'll stir it in a little bit. Make sure that everything we've put in there is evenly distributed, the chicken, the egg, all of it. The chicken's not there for filtration or for really any clarification benefit. It's there to add the flavor back in that we're pulling out by extracting things from the broth. So once the egg white and the chicken mixture starts to bubble up at the top and form a raft, we're gonna just gently poke a hole in the middle of it with the ladle, scoop a little bit through, and just basically baste the raft. That's a good way to kind of push all the liquid back through the raft, and the protein of the egg will bind all of those non-soluble proteins that were clouding it before. So once our raft has done its work and we've got a nice, clean, clear broth, we're gonna strain it off. This time I've got 4 layers of cheesecloth because we want to really filter it. No point in cleaning it out if it's just going to get some stuff on from the pan. Here's what it started as. Pretty shocking difference there. Super, super clean, super, super clear. And then for another comparison, our light stock. So we've got a pretty big difference between our 3 stocks now. So this is the consommé that we just made, the quick stock, and the light stock. And while our broth is now super clear, it's also extremely chickeny. It doesn't taste like it's lost any flavor. It's just lost that thick, cloudy goo that was in there before. All right, so for our final stock, the dark stock, this is the one I want the most of. So I'm using my biggest pot, it's 10 quarts. You know what that means? 3.33 pounds of chicken and a standard mirepoix. The difference between a dark stock and a light stock, with the light stock we blanch it. We want as little color on it as possible. When we wet cook something, we end up with very little browning, if any at all. It depends on what the liquid is. But in this case, we're gonna throw it in the oven. Add everything together in the pan, and now the one difference is gonna be that we're going to add tomato paste. We're gonna add about 60 grams-ish. What it's gonna do is it's gonna add some acid and balance out the flavor of all this roastiness. So we're gonna add a lot of richness. We're gonna need a little bit of balance. So we're just gonna swirl that around until everything's nice and coated. I'm gonna wash my hands and then throw this in the oven. Once your vegetables and everything are roasted, we'll just throw that into the stock pot. Scrape out as much as you can, but then, surprise, stock pot is not going on the burner first. Our roasting pan is. So we're just gonna throw a little bit of water in there, just enough to cover the bottom. And then we're gonna turn on heat underneath it. And we're basically just gonna break down everything that's in the pan. Everything in here is potential flavor, so we wanna make sure that we get all of it. So we move our stock pot back on top. Pour off our roasting pan. And again, add as much cold water as we can. Now most of the fat and the tomato solids will float up to the top, and as they congeal, we can skim them all off. So as it comes up to a simmer, we just want to keep an eye on how much stuff is coming up to the surface and skim that off when we can. All right, so with this dark stock, we're not going to chill it like the others. We're not going to move it to a container. We're going to move it to another pot. And that pot has been cleaned and is lined with a strainer and a cheesecloth again. We're going to filter off all the solids, and then we're going to reduce this stock down to just the smallest amount. That will increase the flavor, increase the gelatin, and we're going to end up with what's called a Demi Gloss. And once we've got these solids strained off, we can actually increase the heat. We don't need to worry as much about making it cloudy. It's going to end up pretty solid and dark anyway. So as we reduce the Demi Gloss, we're going to end up with a case where we've got a pretty thin layer of liquid with a huge surface area, and it's going to reduce faster and faster. If we move it into a smaller pan, we get a more controllable amount of surface area that's evaporating so that we can kind of monitor it more closely. After straining off through a couple layers of cheesecloth, our Demi Gloss has spent the night in the refrigerator, and now it is completely solid. It is basically a sauce that's ready to go at any time, that we can just throw in a frying pan, and we've got a pan sauce for like a sauteed chicken dish, or even like a vegetable, a solid base for any sauce we want to develop from there. It's really awesome, and it's super easy. It just takes a little bit of time. So what this all boils down to is just extraction and reduction. Extract as much as you can from what you've got in the pot. The meat, the vegetables. If you want something richer and more like deep flavor-wise, roast it first. I think a lot of people are confused about stock these days because there's not a clear differentiation between stock and broth and bone broth, which is just stock with a little bit of PR help. It's just a matter of getting the flavor out into a liquid that you can then use for pretty much anything else. So now you know really all there is to know about making stock. These are modern and versatile tools that we can use to add a ton of flavor to whatever they're a part of. Since you know the ratios, you don't really need it, but I'll add the recipes on kitchenomicon.com. I'll have a link in the description below. So now you've got the perfect building blocks to go conjure up something delicious. See ya.